Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Oregon Sea Grant's Careers in Science Investigations webinar. This is the fourth of a series of webinars intended to connect students like you to careers in marine science. And so you'll be able to connect live with professionals working in the field. My name is Lindsay Carroll, and I am the Marine Education Coordinator with Oregon Sea Grant. I traditionally work out of Hatfield Marine Science Center. But Hatfield is unfortunately closed, so that's why we are very excited to offer you education programming virtually. But before we get started, we would love to get to know a little bit more about you. So if you've participated in previous webinars, you'll be familiar with our two poll questions. So Kate Goodwin, our Special Projects Coordinator, is going to be launching our first poll question. So Kate, go ahead and launch that first poll question.
Is that the what grade are you in question?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, that is what grade are you in? Sorry about that, Kate. Thank you so much. So please take a few minutes or a few seconds to indicate whether you're in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, or if you're an adult.
Okay, we have almost everyone has participated, so I'm going to end the poll.
Thank you, Kate. So it looks like we have 61% are middle schoolers, 26% are high schoolers, and we have 13% that are adults. Thank you so much, Kate. So we are going to go ahead and launch our second polling question, which asks you to tell us where you're joining us from. Are you joining us from Oregon, West Coast, not Oregon, the Central US, the East Coast, or are you joining us from outside the US? All right, thank you, Kate. So it looks like we have 67% are joining us from Oregon, 17% joining us from the West Coast, not Oregon, 8% joining us from Central US, and then 8% from the East Coast. Well, welcome everyone. This is very exciting. So thank you for telling us a little bit more about you. We are going to now transition into our first presenter. Our first presenter is Lieutenant Junior Grade Michelle Levano. She works with the NOAA Commissioned Officer Corps, or also known as the NOAA Corps, and she is going to tell you how you can combine your love of science with uniformed service. So Michelle, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen and begin your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for unmuting me. Thanks again for Oregon Sea Grant for organizing these Careers in Science Investigation series. Today I'm going to be talking about the NOAA Commissioned Officer Corps, which is a member, the service that I've been a part of now since 2016. And a little bit background about myself. I am from Long Island, New York, so to all those East Coasters out there. And I kind of grew up on the water and with boats a little bit and whatnot. And I then always had an affinity for swimming and sailing and boating and fishing. I then went to school in Rhode Island at a college called Roger Williams University and studied environmental science and particularly focusing in aquaculture, so raising of clams and oysters. From there, I spent a lot of time on the water working in all around New England. Once I graduated, I then moved down to Virginia for a year, where I was working on the eastern shore of Virginia, raising clams and oysters as well, when I was starting to get a little rambunctious and wanted to get myself into a little bit more of an adventure, and that's when I found out about the NOAA Corps. And in 2016, I found myself as a newly commissioned NOAA Corps officer. So I'll talk a little bit about that. What is the NOAA Corps? So the NOAA Corps is a uniformed service within the United States. So there are 8 uniformed services now. There are the 6 military, including the Space Force, and then your 2 uniformed services, the Public Health Corps and the NOAA Corps. The NOAA Corps is the smallest of all of the 8, and has about 321 officers. So NOAA is within the US Department of Commerce because a lot of the missions that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration support directly impact commerce, whether that's everything from the weather to fisheries investigation to marine charting, which my background has been in so far, and making maps for marine waterways. So a lot of that information goes directly into how the economy works and runs. So that's why NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce. Within NOAA, then that's where we have the NOAA Commissioned Officer Corps. So NOAA kind of ties together a whole bunch of different line offices, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but there's about 13,000 employees, most of them being civilians. So the Officer Corps is a very small subsection of NOAA employees. And our main goal is to assist NOAA's environmental and scientific missions, and we act as the facilitator for a lot of those science purposes. So as a uniformed service and as an officer, you have to have a college degree with a background in either engineering, science, or math. And as I mentioned, we do have 321 commissioned officers that range from 01, so you are on a military pay scale, which is an ensign. We go by the maritime ranks, so those of the Coast Guard and the Navy. So you start off as an ensign, and if you make it all the way up, you would be a rear admiral upper half, or an 08. And again, the main purpose of the NOAA Corps is to kind of serve as the Swiss Army knives of NOAA and to fill a variety of different roles and really facilitate the science. So if you are interested in joining the NOAA Corps, one thing you are going to have to go through is Basic Officer Training Course, or BOTC. And this is held alongside with the US Coast Guard Academy with US Coast Guard commissioned officer candidates. And it's a really beautiful integration of the two seagoing services. It's about 5 months long and really focuses on navigation, ship handling principles, basic seamanship, safety and survival techniques, marine firefighting and damage control, military etiquette, leadership training, learning how to use some maritime technology like radars and ectises or marine chart applications. You got to do some small boat handling and ship simulators. So you can see in these images here, it really is a very intense 5 months of just trying to learn a whole bunch of different skill sets and knowledge and meeting a whole bunch and working with a lot of different people from different backgrounds that you don't necessarily know and get to meet, which is an awesome experience and something I really enjoyed. As part of BOTC, we do also do a cruise on board the US Coast Guard Cutter Eagle, which is a beautiful historic ship that was acquired by the US post-World War II. And again, it's the Coast Guard's training ship, so all Coast Guard officers have sailed on this ship. So it's a really awesome experience that we get to do so as well. And was one of my favorite parts and highlights of the program. So what exactly do you do as a NOAA Corps officer? So focusing on the idea that NOAA Corps officers facilitate the science. NOAA has a fleet of 15 vessels, which we're going to talk about here, where they're kind of homeported all over the country. But again, Mach P is right across from Hatfield Marine Science Center, and how I came in contact with Kate and Lindsay when I was a junior officer there. As you can see, these are the different home ports where NOAA ships are located. And I'm going to go to talk about now the different missions that the ships support. First, we have the exploration fleet. So we have 4 ships that are dedicated towards ocean exploration, and they kind of do a variety of tasks. As you can see, they're spread out throughout the country, and they travel worldwide. The Ron Brown just got back from a circumnavigating the globe last year. So pretty awesome. They traveled all around the world to a variety of different countries and whatnot. So this is a really great career if you want to get out and explore and kind of see a lot of things. The exploration vessels collect a whole bunch of different data from atmospheric to ocean chemistry. They do dive operations and coral reef assessments, and they do a lot of deep sea species exploration, particularly with remote operated vehicles. They also do a lot of buoy service and deployment. So that includes everything from tsunami warning buoys to floats that collect a lot of different atmospheric data, and then just general scientific research floats on ice coverage and ocean chemistry. So next we have our fisheries and research fleet. So this is a little bit larger portion of our ships here. And again, you can see that they're all spread throughout the country, with the Belle M. Shimada being homeport in Newport, Oregon, and there rather frequently. But the fishery vessels provide a better understanding of the physical presence of fish populations within certain areas. They also explore the different biological processes and kind of do general like long line surveys and whatnot. And their projects are repeatable year after year after year to evaluate these stocks. And then lastly, there's the NOAA Hydrographic Fleet, which is what my career so far has been focused in. And the NOAA Ship Rainier, which I was a junior officer on, is homeported out of Newport, Oregon. Again, we've kind of got 2 West Coast ships and 2 East Coast ships here, with then small response teams, which is what I'm currently on up in Seattle, Washington, throughout the country, able to respond to groundings and hurricanes and whatnot more easily. So the nautical charting mission, or creating the kind of marine maps for boats to use, is you're driving a lot of small boats and generating and collecting data for these, again, marine maps on what does the bottom of the ocean look like. So we're conducting survey operations to make sure our goods and services can get in and out of our ports. Over 80% of worldwide commerce occurs over the waterways, so it's really important to know that ships are going to be able to get safely from point A to point B. And then lastly, in addition to NOAA's 15 ships, the NOAA Corps officers also operate NOAA's 9 aircrafts. And again, these do a kind of variety of missions, from primarily hurricane surveillance and response to also more charting of shorelines and land-based services, marine mammal observation, and environmental assessment and research. So that can be everything from wildfire surveys to snowmelt surveys, to how much water is going to come down the rivers and is there a risk of flooding this year, which is pretty cool. Extremely dynamic jobs, and even smaller kind of organization. This is all, or subset of the NOAA Corps. All of NOAA's aviation programs are based out of Lakeland, Florida. And again, so we talked a little bit about what the aviation program does, but they're really trying to maximize data collection from above, right? So the ships are collecting data kind of on a surface level and then below, and the aircraft are just up above it all, trying to get that big picture overview of it. And then the NOAA Corps divers, I'm gonna let Scott, the next presenter, talk a little bit more about this. But if you join the NOAA Corps and you do think diving is neat and something you would like to do, that is a possibility of a path of what you can do. But I'll let Scott talk a little bit more about that next. In addition to serving on board ships, the way the rotation works is you are on a ship for 2 years, and then you go to a shore assignment or a mobile assignment for 2 to 3 years. And basically in your shore assignment, you're supporting one of NOAA's 6 line offices. So they're extremely diverse, and you get to see completely different career tracks and provide technical and operational and managerial experience to all different areas of NOAA. The 6 line offices in NOAA are the National Environmental Satellite and Data Information, the National Marine Fisheries Service, the National Weather Service, which most people are most familiar with, the the Office of Ocean and Atmospheric Research, which again does a lot of that deep sea kind of exploration, the National Ocean Service, which is responsible for our nation's charts, and then the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, which operates NOAA's fleet of vessels and aircraft. So we do have kind of a wide variety of individuals on the line, but for those high school students and rising college students, there is a really awesome NOAA student scholarship called the Hollings Undergraduate Scholarship Program. So this is a scholarship that lasts for 2 years and includes a 10-week paid summer internship and a housing subsidy during the summer internship. And I've had 2 friends in college that were both Hollings scholars, and as I've progressed here in NOAA, it's really enjoyable to work with people who were former Hollings scholars and now full-time career with NOAA. So if NOAA is something you're interested in, but not necessarily per se the NOAA Corps, Hollings scholarship is a great way to get your foot in the door and kind of explore what it would be like to work at NOAA. Additionally, if you are interested in becoming a NOAA Corps officer. There are some requirements. You have to be a US citizen, you have to have a college degree, you have to have kind of a focus in either science, math, or engineering coursework. You have to be able to get a background check, etc. And I'm happy to talk more about those requirements later on. But with that, I am ready for questions and answers if anyone is available, or there were questions, Lindsay, that to be passed on. But otherwise, please feel free to email me if you want more information or whatnot. But thanks everyone for coming today.
Thank you, Michelle. That was a fantastic presentation. We have a question here from Reed. Do you get seasick?
I do get seasick. So on board each ship, there is a medical officer, right? Because at sea, you have to be able to respond to your own emergencies, which is why we go through such extensive training on how to put out fires and whatnot. So your medical officer, before you get underway for a leg, will usually come over the ship's loudspeaker or the announcement machine, or your PA, and similar in school, and say that they're giving out seasickness tablets. They have some effect for some people, don't necessarily work for me, but usually after 1 or 2 days of getting underway, it balances out and you get okay.
Well, that's good to hear, because I've heard from even fishermen too, that you just kind of sort of quote unquote get used to it. Is
Absolutely.
that fair?
That's very fair. You just get used to it. And it's super important. The food at sea is very important. So your cooks usually are your most favored people, and they know when the seas are going to get rough, what kind of food to serve to help facilitate that.
That's wonderful. All right, thank you. We have a question from Matthew. What is NOAA currently doing to explore the deep sea?
That's an awesome question, Matthew, and I'm not 100% sure if I can provide the best answer with that. That so far is what my career has not been focused in. But NOAA is the leading deep sea frontier, so to speak, within the country. So the Office of Exploration and Research, OER, is the website and direction I would point you in to get a better answer of that. The NOAA ship, the Oceanic Explorer, does a lot of that research, and often you can watch, they do live feeds of their deep sea exploration, and sometimes it's really boring, and they have people that commentary on what they're seeing in the live feed, and the people are just like telling jokes back and forth. But other times they do see things that are really cool, and you can find a lot of those videos on YouTube too.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, a question from Isaac. What are the requirements to get to the highest rank? And so two-parter, if you don't mind. So what are the requirements to get the highest rank? And then what are the most common things you have to research?
Oh, good question, Isaac. So requirements to get to the highest rank. So I'm gonna put on some government speak here. The highest rank, the upper and lower admirals within the NOAA Corps are what are called senior executives. So similar to civilians that want to hold a senior executive position, there's educational requirements that need to be met, plus leadership and professional requirements. So you have to have X number of years of experience, you have to hold similar positions for X number of years, you have to be able to demonstrate using your demonstrate your prior experience and why you would be a good choice for that fit. So it is highly competitive. And within the NOAA Corps, we do have 3 admirals. We have 1 upper half, who's kind of the director of all of the NOAA Corps. And then we have 2 lower halves, one who's the deputy director of the NOAA Corps in aviation and ship operations. And then we have the nation's hydrographer. So, which is pretty cool because I appreciate that. And then the second part of that question is, what is the most common thing you have to research? So I think that really depends on what a NOAA Corps officer's career path, so to speak, looks like. For me, it is the seafloor. So what does the ocean bottom look like and where are hazards or potential dangers to navigations that ships could hit and cause issues. But it really depends. Again, NOAA has those 6 line offices that really do a variety of research, everything from satellites up in space to forecasting your local weather that you see on TV every day. So it really is rather broad.
Very good, thanks, Michelle. And we have a question from Colleen, and I'm sure many people are curious. What happened to the ship that is pictured on your slide?
So this ship right here, so part of my NOAA Corps career so far has been as part of navigation is also hurricane response. So I've responded to hurricanes Michael, Barry, and Dorian. And this ship was from Hurricane Michael in Panama City, and it was a newly constructed ship that, because of the hurricane, had broken free of, so to speak, its lines. So right when you put a ship on, is at the dock, ropes, large ropes hold it to the dock, and the hurricane had broken those ropes, and the ship drifted out to sea and then landed in a area that wasn't deep enough for the ship, and it toppled over, which was really quite sad because it was a new construction ship. So.
Thank you for clarifying that. And we have questions from multiple of our participants. Curious of like, what is your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job is definitely reaching out to the stakeholders. Right now in my current position, I work a lot with the Army Corps and with, again, different organizational groups and the Coast Guard, so making sure that ships can navigate in and out safely. So here in Seattle, our major maritime concern or marine concern is the West Seattle Bridge, which connects kind of downtown Seattle to part of the peninsula, and whether it's going to collapse or not. And it does go over a large major waterway that's used by a lot of fishing fleet and construction, and a lot of the Port of Seattle piers are there. And then how does that impact stuff getting up to Alaska? So that's been really enjoyable. The best part of my job overall, though, is the fact that I don't spend every day at a desk.
I can understand that. So there is a couple of folks that are interested in how long are you at sea?
So each ship has a home port. So I'll talk about the NOAA ship Rainier because that was the ship I was on as a junior officer, and that's home ported there in Newport, Oregon. Each ship has a home port, and typically you'll spend winter, what we call the winter season, in your home port. So that's typically right before Thanksgiving up until late March, early May. Or late March, early April. Then you have your field season. So during your field season, you may be in and out of your home port, or you may be in and out of all different ports. Ships are really cool because they can move around pretty easily and have a lot of space to do so. There's no roads that they have to stick to or whatnot. So you're typically underway from anywhere 2 to 3 weeks. And that's, again, away on a ship operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, out at sea, and then every 2 to 3 weeks you come into a port. It might not necessarily be your home port, and you get to explore a new port or area and kind of get more fuel and food are the primary limitations as to why you can't be out to sea for longer.
Very good, thanks, Michelle. And one more, if you don't mind me asking. Yeah. I think it's a really good one from Sydney. Does the college degree you have affect what group you are in during your time with the NOAA Corps? So like mapping the ocean floor or studying in quiet environments, is it degree dependent?
Somewhat. They definitely try to pertain to the individual officer's interests. So a lot of my coworkers and cohorts had backgrounds in marine biology or fisheries, so they went to a fisheries ship. And so they aren't necessarily conducting the fisheries research, but they're helping facilitate that, right? They're driving the ship, they're making sure operations are done in a timely manner and safely as well. For myself, I had, based on my kind of background in aquaculture, I had a lot of experience using some kind of mapping-based programs like ArcGIS and whatnot. So that I had experience with that. I knew it was something I was interested in and I enjoyed. The one thing I really enjoy about the hydrographic or charting mission is that you are part of the scientific group that is collecting the data. You're out on the boat, you're very involved in the process, and it's a fantastic community to be a part of.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to all of our participants for all of your engaging questions. We're going to go ahead and transition to our next presenter. So thank you, Michelle, for your time. And so our next presenter is Dr. Scott Heppell, who works in fisheries. And he's going to tell us a 2-decade-long success story that helped save the critically endangered Nassau grouper population in the Cayman Islands. So Scott, you may go ahead and share your screen and begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'll do that in just a second. First of all, I want to say hi and thanks to Lindsay and Kate for inviting me today and for all of you for joining us. As she mentioned, I am going to share a bit of an underwater sea story that relates to my career. And in thinking about this, and I realized this a while ago, is that my life is a lot like a BBC nature documentary, really in the truest sense, where you watch those nature shows and it's like the most amazing footage of animals in the environment in the ocean that you've ever seen, leaping dolphins and all these sorts of things, and big tuna and whales and so on and so forth. But you know that that minute or so of video that you saw that they managed to capture was preceded by weeks, if not months, of tedious waiting and trying and hoping, and then finally you get that. So there's this whole big part of science and nature like that, where you spend a whole lot of time waiting for something to happen, and then it happens, and it's one of the most amazing things that you've ever seen. And that's the story that I'd like to share with you today. And I'm going to take you back to one of those very specific moments. So this is something that I was doing earlier this year, February 11th, in fact, 2020, at a very specific location at 19.647 north by 80.107 west, which is down in the Caribbean Ocean, at 5:45 p.m. And so I'm going to take you to the Caribbean, and there's something very special about that particular time, is that was when the full moon was rising. And the full moon was rising over a little island in the Caribbean about 90 miles south of Cuba called Little Cayman Island. And you'll see down in the lower left down here, I have a little dive flag. Well, that's where that spot is located. And we've been waiting all year since the previous winter to get back to Little Cayman Island in the middle of the Caribbean, this little postage stamp of land that's maybe 10 miles long and 2 miles wide, to get in the water to see one of the planet's really amazing migrations. And I know this video is going to probably be a little jumpy, but I'm going to take us underwater, and what you're seeing is a great migration of a fish called Nassau grouper. And maybe this doesn't seem like much to you, but it is one of the most important species in the Caribbean. They are very much to the Caribbean what salmon are to those of us that live here in the Pacific Northwest. And what you're seeing here is a really healthy population of Nassau grouper. You can get in the water, and I'm probably 85, 90 feet underwater right now with my scuba gear on, just watching this amazing parade of fish. It's a great migration like you might see on the plains of Africa or something like that. And it means a lot for the success of the species. And what we call this in science is an aggregation. And in fact, it's a spawning aggregation. So all these fish live all over the reef across the entire island. But every year on the winter full moon, the first full moon that happens after the winter solstice, they get together to spawn and reproduce, which is great. It's a great way to get together, have your babies, and then you go back to your home reefs. So let me introduce this little critter to you a little bit. And there's a picture of a profile on the right and a short video clip on the left. The Nassau grouper is really an ecologically and culturally important species, just the way salmon are here in the Pacific Northwest. They're the top resident predator on Caribbean coral reefs. There's other species that eat them, big sharks and things like that, but they are a top level predator. They have supported highly valuable fisheries in the Caribbean. In fact, they used to be the most important fishery in the entire Caribbean. And as you can see from our friend here on the right that is interacting with my dive buddy, Steve, they can be really photogenic, really charismatic. It's about as close as you can get to having a pet cat or dog underwater. Steve was there, he's trying to put a camera on the bottom for science purposes, and this fish wants to basically, you're working on your computer and your cat leaps up on your keyboard. That's what this fish is doing to him. They're a very personable fish. And so they have a really high value to islands in the Caribbean because divers love to interact with fish like this. But of course, there are problems because the Nassau grouper is also in trouble. It has actually been protected in US waters since the 1990s. Right? It used to be fished really heavily in the US, mostly in Florida, but also in Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands and a variety of other places. And the population got so low, it was so overfished that they basically put a complete fishing ban on it. You're not allowed to catch them at all. And there's some protections elsewhere in the Caribbean, but not much. And so the population has continued to decline. And it's gotten so small that as people try to protect it, they hope that the population will recover, but it's actually not recovering anywhere. And this has caused the species to be listed as a critically endangered species. That's one step above on this red list from extinct in the wild. That is, people are really concerned that Nassau grouper may go extinct in the wild. This is true throughout the entire Caribbean Sea, all the way from Mexico in the west to Saba and the Antilles in the east, and all the way down almost to the coast of north coast of South America. And the story is true in the Cayman Islands as well. So I gave you that little picture of Cayman Island. Well, in 2001, that aggregation that I just showed you video of that was taken in 2020, that aggregation was discovered by local fishermen. And they fished it and they fished it and they fished it. And when they started fishing, we think there may have been as many as 7,000 adult fish there. And by the time they were done, there was somewhere between 1,000 and maybe 1,500 left. And in fact, they caught so many of them because they're really easy to catch that they couldn't even sell them all. They actually had to haul some of them to the dump, which was really too bad. It's really a waste of an animal. It's a waste of fish, and it was a waste of their effort. But what this caused was a conservation reaction that I've been involved with now for many, many years, called the Grouper Moon Project, protecting a Caribbean icon. And if anybody's interested in learning a lot more of that, it is it's a collaboration between the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, the government of the Cayman Islands, Scripps Institution of Oceanography down in San Diego, and Oregon State University here in Corvallis. And if you want to learn more about the project and everything that's been going on, you can go to the Reef website, which is just reef.org, and look for the Grouper Moon Project. What I'm going to share with you is some of the underwater work that we've been doing, which we can summarize very simply as 20 years of underwater science, right? And so we had this event where this aggregation had been discovered. It got fished really hard by a bunch of fishermen that almost got wiped out. The Cayman government put in an emergency rule to ban the harvest of the species and said, okay, we've got this ban in place. We need science to understand how to conserve this species, to rebuild the population so that they're there for divers to see and potentially for fishermen to catch if we can stabilize the population. And so one of the fundamental questions that we need to ask and then answer is, how many fish are there underwater? And that sounds like a really easy question to ask, and it is, but it's an incredibly hard question to answer, right? So you saw that video. It was beautiful, clear water, nothing like what we get here off the Oregon coast. And you saw those fish swimming by. So just ask yourself, how many fish do you think were there? That's a real science question that we've tried to answer underwater, doing research diving, scientific diving, in a variety of different ways. And I'm going to share those with you. The simplest way is to actually do what we call underwater math. And it's what's called a mark recapture project. And so on the left picture here, you'll see Croy McCoy of the Cayman Islands Department of Environment, their natural resource agency. And he has just put a little pink tag just below the fin of that fish. And so each year we go down and we tag 100 fish. And then once those fish are tagged, they swim around in amongst all the other fish and we count fish. We count 50 fish and say how many of those were tagged. We count 50 fish, how many of those were tagged. So if you were to go down and count 50 fish and 2 of those fish were tagged, then we know 2 out of 50 fish is tagged, and we have 100 out of the total number of fish that are there. That would give us, if you do the math there, its ratios would tell us that there's 2,500 fish in the population, right? So we can do this over and over and over again and get an estimate of how many fish there are using this underwater math mark recapture technique. And we can then, if we do that year after year after year, we can see whether or not the emergency rule is working and whether the population is rebuilding or not, okay? That's one way to know. Here's another way to know, is to look at the sizes of the fish. Are they getting bigger? Are they growing? And we do that using laser beams. And if you can use lasers for science, that's the best, right? We have a video camera with a pair of lasers on it that both point in exactly parallel in the same direction. And so here is 2 laser beams on the side of a fish. Each one of those, and those laser beams are 25 centimeters apart. So if I take video of this fish, and then I take that video into a computer program, I can tell the computer program that the distance between those 2 dots is 25 centimeters. If I know that, then I can ask the computer the question, if that's 25 centimeters, how long is that? And we can actually measure the fish underwater while we're scuba diving. We're moving into more advanced techniques now, where we are using high-tech stereo video, right? So this is me with what's called a stereo video camera. So it's a pair of cameras, one on each end, and they're angled in slightly at about 5 degrees to give it stereoscopic vision, right? It's the same as we have. And our 2 eyes in the front, we can actually tell how far away something is by the fact that we have stereoscopic vision, and we can even estimate size. Well, again, if we have stereoscopic vision with 2 cameras and we put that into a computer program, we can actually measure the size of the fish that we're seeing that way and get an idea of how big the fish are, how fast they're growing, so on and so forth. And then finally, one of the other ways where we're using science underwater and in the laboratory and in the computer room is that we're asking the question, how many fish are there using artificial intelligence? So we have 2 fish here on the left and the right, pictures taken at different times, but it turns out they're actually not 2 different fish. They are the same fish. And if you can look, they have this dot pattern around their eyeballs, the one on the left and the one on the right, and the markings on them are distinct to each individual fish. So we are actually now starting to collect video underwater that we can bring into the computer lab and into what's called a machine learning environment using artificial intelligence, and actually use facial recognition software, the same that's being used for humans, to unlock your phone, for example, facial recognition software to identify individual fish. So we can actually try to track every fish in the population. And again, if we know every fish in the population and then we see a new fish that we don't recognize, that means we've probably got another fish, right? So let's answer that fundamental question using these data that we have. These are the data, this is the data show what was happening to the population here on the left from the early 90s through about 2001 when that population was discovered. And the probability of actually seeing a fish was going down and down and down. And then the aggregation was discovered around here, and then it was protected. And what have we seen since that time that it was protected? Well, we see the population going up, 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 which means that it really is a conservation success story. Now, what does it look like? This is sort of a cartoon drawing, if you will. What does it really look like? Well, this is what's been happening to our population over time, since back in the early 2000s up until this year's data, showing our population has grown to over 8,000 fish. And 8,000 fish might not seem like a lot, but at this point in time, the work that we've done over the last 2 decades with the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, with the Cayman government, OSU, and Scripps, has been the most successful endangered species recovery program for Nassau grouper across the entire species range. And in fact, it was so significant that this last January, our work was featured not only in one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the entire country called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, but it was actually showcased as the cover art on that journal because of the conservation work that we've done. All right. Not only that, but the work has led into the Cayman Islands government writing new marine reserve legislation and other protections for the species as permanent protections, including changing the rules about what you can do at those places where they spawn. And then finally, of course, if you want to learn a bit more about how we're doing this, there's a whole education program associated with this that I don't really have time to go into today, but want to mention it. You can find it at the groupereducation.edublogs.org. And then finally, I'm going to finish up giving a little bit about my career at the end instead of the beginning. For those of you that might think that doing things like this would be fun and working underwater would be exciting, and Michelle, of course, touched on that briefly, but if you want to be a scientific diver like me, first of all, you have to have that pretty keen interest in working in the oceans, which I suspect a lot of you do since you've joined us here today. You need to work on getting a degree, probably in the sciences and engineering fields. And then specifically to be a scientific diver, you actually have to be certified as a scientific diver, right? This is from the NOAA Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, so part of Michelle's group. And the regulations are very similar whether you're working for a federal agency like NOAA, a state government, or an academic institution. The first thing is you have to be scuba certified. So you can go out and you can get your scuba certification when you're 12 years old. That's when you can first be scuba certified. If any of you ever end up at Oregon State University teaches scuba, and you can actually get scuba certified at OSU. Right? You have to be a trained rescue diver. So I've had to go through the training of how to actually be a rescue diver and rescue people underwater. OSU teaches this as well. You have to have experience. You have to log a bunch of dives underwater. You have to pass a dive physical and a drug test. And then you have to know how to administer safety, CPR, first aid, and emergency oxygen, because oxygen is a really important part of safety for underwater work. And then finally, you have to take a scientific diver class to be a certified scientific diver, and Oregon State University has that as well. So those are all sorts of things. Just really briefly, I'll summarize me. I grew up in Oregon. I started going to the Hatfield Marine Science Center when I was 5 years old. So back in 1975, to give you an idea of how old I am, maybe 7 years old, something like that. I got an undergraduate degree in biology. I decided that wasn't enough. I went on and got graduate degrees, both a master's and PhD in North Carolina, and then had an opportunity to move back here and live this BBC nature documentary life as a professor at Oregon State University. So that's what I have to say. I'm happy to entertain questions if anybody has any, and thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Scott. That was fantastic. We have a question from Sydney, since you just spoke about diving. We're gonna throw this your way first. When did you start scuba diving? And then a little bit separately, what inspired you to start your job or to do what you do?
Right. So I'll answer that first one. I actually got into scuba diving quite late. I didn't get into scuba diving until I was in graduate school, and I needed it as a tool. Had I known as a 12-year-old what I learned when I was 24, that diving was amazing and it could allow me to be the marine scientist that I wanted to be, I would have done it much earlier. So what was the second part of that question?
Why did you get into the current job, or what inspired you to do
Yeah, I tell you, it was going to the Hatfield Marine Science Center starting when I was like in 1975, right? It was the only place on the Oregon coast to learn about the ocean. I was always that kid when we went to the beach and the car doors would open up and I'd go running down the beach, down the sand towards the water, and you could hear my mom yelling after me, "Don't go over the tops of your boots." And I'd be already up to my waist in the water because I loved being in and around the ocean. I love being on boats. Everything about it, you know, and of all the places I've been in the world that are amazing and beautiful, Oregon has some of the most beautiful coastline anywhere. And I just love being there, and I have the curiosity of wanting to know how it works.
Fantastic, Scott. Agreed. We have a question from Amelia. Do you study other kinds of fish?
I do, and that's the other really great part about the job that I've had here at OSU is that I've worked in the Bering Sea, I've worked in the Caribbean, I've worked in the Mediterranean, the Gulf of Mexico, right here in Oregon. That, and that's for me one of the great jobs about being able to work on fish is that as long as there's fish and water there, I get to work in it. It's that part of it's been amazing. I've worked on both sides of the Pacific, in fact, both here in Oregon, a little bit in California, up in Alaska, in Japan as well.
Fantastic. We're going to squeeze one more in from
Okay.
Shay. What can I do to help protect endangered species?
There's a lot. I think if everybody spent a lot more time making deliberate choices in the things that we do and the items that we consume, we'd have a lot less impact. Right? For example, a lot of the electricity in the Pacific Northwest comes from the dam hydropower systems on the Columbia River. But that also is not good for salmon. Now, if you want to save salmon, does that mean we should sit in the dark? No, not necessarily, because we have needs as well. But if you are careful about the electricity you use, then you lower your impact. Very similarly, if you like eating seafood, and I know a lot of people do, including me, you need to make informed decisions that you make sure you know what you're eating and that it is from a certified sustainable fishery. There's a lot of concern right now about plastics in the ocean. We need to be careful about our output of plastics and our consumption of plastics, which is what leads to them being in the environment. So there's lots of things that can be done. And we just need to think about and maybe slightly modify a lot of the daily life choices that we make. We don't have to make radical changes in our lifestyle, but small changes every day can make a difference.
Absolutely, Scott. Well put. I think if we can all make small changes ourselves individually, that all adds up to big changes as a community and beyond. So thank you so much for that.
Agreed.
All right. Well, I would love to continue to ask you more of these fantastic questions, but unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. But let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. And just to say that participants, please go ahead and continue to enter your questions into the Q&A box. We will work with our presenters after the fact to try to get as many of your questions answered as possible. And so this webinar was recorded. And so you can then access the answers to those questions alongside this webinar recording on our website after the fact. So before you go, we would love your feedback. So please fill out our brief survey. Kate's going to go ahead and drop that survey link into our chat window, which is separate from our question and answer box. So go ahead and either click that URL or copy and paste that URL into your web browser and give us your feedback. We also encourage you to register for our future webinars. We have webinars scheduled for every Wednesday in May at 4 o'clock. And we also are going to be extending our webinar series through mid-June. So please keep an eye on our Career Day website. If Kate can drop that link into our chat box, you can go ahead and access our Career Day website. So go ahead and register for future webinars and keep an eye for the topics of our June webinars. And I would love to highlight our presenters for next week, May 20th at 4 p.m. are Toby Harbison and Ashley Han. We're going to be featuring these two graduate students from the Marine Resource Management program as part of the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences as part of Oregon State University. And so I'm very excited to highlight this program because I myself am an alumni from the Marine Resource Management program. It's what originally brought me here to Oregon. And so please join us. Toby's going to be telling us about her research focused on Dungeness crab, which is a commercially important species here in Oregon and beyond, and her path leading to grad school. And then we're also going to hear from Ashley Han, and she's going to tell us about her recent expedition to a field station in Antarctica, where she worked with a team of scientists. So she's going to highlight the fact that oceanographers often get to work with a diverse team to accomplish a task. And so she worked with chemists, physicists, biologists, cooks and mechanics and carpenters, all to construct a ocean observing system in Antarctica. So please join us for that webinar. You can use the Career Day link to register for that. So that's all we have time for today. So this concludes our webinar. We want to thank our presenters for their time, and we want to thank you participants for joining us. We hope to see you next time. Have a great evening.